Lord. Wine improves with age. The older we get, the more we like it. Brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, welcome to Bat Country. What is this for? Alcohol lies, and when it's in you, you lie too. The myth of the functioning alcoholic is surely the biggest lie, the biggest bullshit in all of alcoholism bullshittery. And there's a lot of bullshit in alcohol. That myth is that we can be really heavy drinkers and still have normal, stable, successful lives. And it's not true. Ever. It is never true. The functioning alcoholic thing is always a myth, made up by people to flatter themselves slightly about their drinking problem. The central premise of this episode is that functioning alcoholism is a lie, and that it's a harmful one. It's a dangerous one. And I'm kind of appealing to you. If you're the kind of person who describes yourself as a functioning alcoholic, by the end of this video, I would like you to stop. And on top of that, I'm going to explain why I think that I am a functional alcoholic now in sobriety. We'll get there. One of you described yourselves like that in the comments. It was ages ago, but it really stuck with me. And I haven't been able to find the comment or the person who said it. So if it was you who described yourself as a functioning alcoholic now that you're sober, raise your hand so that I can thank you for giving me that gift. Oh. And I should also say, like and subscribe if you are willing to do so. I always forget to say that in my videos. And I recently had a conversation with another far more professional sober YouTuber who reminded me to say it. So I'll say it now. Like and subscribe if you are so inclined for more kind of sobriety content. I'm a professional. To get to that premise of this video, those premises, I'm going to describe an anecdote very briefly about a period of my life, of my alcoholism, in which I think I could probably be described as a functioning alcoholic. And then I'm going to tell you why I think that description is bullshit. So let me talk about myself for a couple of minutes before we talk in generalities. Let me share just a tiny glimpse of my experience of being a functioning alcoholic. Now, you might have seen this image if you follow me on Instagram. I found it while I was digging through my archives. So this picture was taken 5 years ago when I was about 34. And annoyingly to me at least, I think I look kind of okay in it. I'm wearing a nice 3-piece suit, handmade in Shanghai for me, and a solid gold tie clip, and an only slightly receding hairline. The moment it got worse than that, I just cut it all off. I was kind of polished up and then rolled out on camera at the Museum of Sex in New York to make a documentary about expensive, posh sex toys. That's why I was there, and that's why I'm dressed like that, to talk about posh dildos. I've lived a very weird life. I looked good. I looked healthy, kind of, to a stranger. And that day I gave a good account of myself and of my work and my career and my industry. And afterwards I was very proud of that documentary. I was proud of the opportunity. But I can never watch it again. I can never go back and see that documentary. Because it makes me sick to look at it. Because I know what that image, that documentary, I know what it meant for me personally. So here's the truth about that photo and why it's relevant for this subject matter. That moment captured in that image that I showed you a moment ago, it captures the moment, the very, very moment I transitioned from a functioning alcoholic to a full-blown, hopeless alcoholic. So I'd had a couple of weeks to prepare and before I flew out to film that documentary with the crew from Vice. And I was already, at that time in my life, I was already beginning to lose control. So even while I was preparing for that opportunity, I was drunk every day, including in the mornings and going to work. I would get up at 6 a.m., drink, go to the gym. I was drinking in the gym, go to work, doing my job to some level of success, and then drunk immediately at the end of the work day. So just straight away, I would leave the office and be drunk 20 minutes later. Every day for years and years and years. And it had progressed. So up to the point where I was about to film that documentary, I'd been living in Shanghai for 4 years or so. And I was now a blackout drunk every day. And somehow still managing to get up at 6, even if I went to bed at 3. And I would often be drunk in the office too. So it was a bad scene. People were starting to really notice. And when that documentary was put in my lap, it was me and Dieter Von Teese in that episode. It was a very incredible opportunity, and I knew it was. And I had dedicated myself to remaining sober for the 4 days that I was in New York, and specifically for the 2 days that I was going to be filming. So I allowed myself to be drunk for the flight out of Shanghai. I was drunk on that flight, but I had made a deal with myself to be sober when I landed, or at least sober up when I got to New York, and to not be drunk there until after the documentary. I would not drink at all before filming. And the thing about that is that if you're negotiating with your alcoholism, when you're making secret deals and promises with yourself and with your addiction, you're already deeply in trouble. You know, if you're making an exchange, okay, I won't drink, but then I'll drink heavily immediately afterwards. It's already getting on top of you in quite a serious way. And I hope other sober people will back me up in the comments here that that's their experience too. That once they noticed that they were trading off internally to be sober for a period with the reward of drinking heavily afterwards, that they also agree that that's a bad place. That's a real massive warning sign that your drinking is quickly spiraling out of control. And the reason why that's dangerous is because if you're negotiating with your own alcoholism, the alcohol has the power in that negotiation. But I did it. Certainly for the 2 days that we were filming, I did stay sober. The problem with that is that I had been a daily heavy drinker for years. And then suddenly I had this 2-day, 3-day period. And when we got to filming, I was actually going into withdrawal. I was going into withdrawal when the cameras started rolling. You can't really see it. I don't think a stranger can see it in the image that I showed you. But I can. And I remember how it felt. Because I had no concept of withdrawal. I was unaware that alcohol has a withdrawal period. And those 2 days where I dried out for the filming, those were the first 2 consecutive days that I had been sober for I don't know how long, maybe 10 years. And I remember it vividly. I remember that day. It was before I knew or had acknowledged that I was an alcoholic, but I had an awareness that I had a problem. But I was uninformed and naive about things like withdrawal and the effects of alcohol on my body and what happens if you suddenly stop. I didn't know any of that back then. And I remember I was jittery, really jittery on camera and nervous, and my mind was racing and I was sweating bullets through my suit. And I had palpitations and I had that paralyzing fight or flight response the whole time that we were filming. And it was hours. And as soon as we wrapped that day and I was released from my obligations, I walked out of the Museum of Sex on 5th Avenue and straight into a liquor store. And 20 minutes later, I was hammered. And I remember screwing off the lid. And my next memory is from a couple of days later, speaking to the police at JFK airport and being asked to leave the terminal, being refused permission to board my flight because I was so fucking drunk. In fact, I'm shocked that I even made it to JFK to get that flight back to Shanghai. And afterwards, I walked out of JFK with my suitcase and walked to a motel. And if you know that area, I don't know how I did that. To this day, I don't know how I got into a motel from the airport. And I don't know either how I got eventually back to Shanghai. I'm fairly certain I missed another flight after that, or was refused on another flight after that one. And I am scared to ask anybody who might have knowledge of how I got home, because I don't think I'm going to like what I hear if I turn over that particular rock. I was blackout drunk for days immediately after we finished that documentary, and it wouldn't stop again for years. And that's the truth of functioning alcoholism. Yeah, every now and then you might be able to have a moment of lucidity, and you might be able to pull on a tailored suit or a smart dress and fulfill some obligations, be at important places on time every now and then. And you might be able to pass yourself off to strangers as a normal human. But from my personal experience, it's all downhill from there. And that ability to meet obligations and pay bills, they become the exception rather than the rule quite quickly. My point is that the reason I show you that image and tell you that story is because I think that to an outsider, to a stranger, I might look like I had my shit together. Functioning alcoholism is not functioning. I was a mess in every way when that was happening. I looked good in the photographs, but what you didn't see was me flailing around on the streets of New York, being a danger to myself, or nearly getting arrested twice at JFK. Functioning alcoholism is not functioning. It's only the appearance of functioning. And if you're in a functioning alcoholic state, and I think you'll probably agree with me, even all the other lies that you're telling yourself, you would agree that most of your time is spent either drunk or being dead tired all the fucking time. And that meets only the bare minimum definition of functioning. If you had a V8 Mustang, but it was only firing on one cylinder, you probably wouldn't describe it as functioning. You would probably describe it as defective. And that's what functioning alcoholism is like. You can give it the fancy name if it makes you feel better, but I would suggest what you need is not to feel better about it, but to do something about it. Because right now you're just wandering through life with half-closed eyes, and that's a waste. So instead of talking about the myths of functioning alcoholism as we see portrayed in like Mad Men or How I Met Your Mother, did you ever notice how much they drank in that show? They were never not drinking, and there were no consequences. I think How I Met Your Mother is worse for its depictions of alcohol than Mad Men or Peaky Blinders. I hate that show. How I Met Your Mother. I hate it. I hate it. Anyway, everybody drinks in those shows without consequences. They drink all the time. So let's talk about the reality of functioning alcoholism, and we'll do it by what people who describe themselves as functioning alcoholics tend to ignore, is that alcoholism is progressive. It's progressive, and it's always malignant and never benign. Untreated, I will say with confidence that it always gets worse. Never better. No exceptions. So maybe, like me, you might be able to pull on a smart suit every now and then and go about your business and convince strangers that you're not a drunk, you're just a very hard drinker. But you won't convince me, because I can see your bullshit a mile away. And a fisherman always spots another fisherman from afar. You might be able to hold down a job and some stability, but it won't last. There are no good outcomes. Once you've crossed a certain threshold into problematic drinking, there are no good outcomes if you do nothing about it. It's just hospitals and jails and loneliness and early death for us. So do yourself a favor. If you are one of the people who is comfortable with the title functioning alcoholic, just go ahead and drop the functioning part. Just get used to it. Just get used to saying that you are an alcoholic, because that's all that matters. Functioning does not mean healthy. Now, I hope I don't have to tell an audience like this just how stupefyingly toxic and dangerous alcohol is. Go and watch the Huberman podcast for the science of how damaging it is. But I am qualified to say that even if you're able to hold down a job and have some stability, you are still doing serious liver and kidney damage at the very least. Even while you think everything is balanced on the surface, beneath it you're doing exactly the same damage as every other alcoholic is doing. You're still suffering the negative cognitive effects, the cognitive decline that comes over long periods of drinking. And you're still increasing your daily anxiety. And you're spiraling down the drain of a serious major depressive disorder too. Just comes with the territory. And you make it worse with every drink. Does that sound like functioning? Sounds like withering to me. If you are a functioning alcoholic, you are doing exactly the same kind of damage to your body as the kind of alcoholic who has already lost everything. Next, the myth of control. Those alcoholics who haven't yet lost everything, or who haven't ever hit rock bottom in any significant way, they tend to be the hardest people to talk to about this. I know that I was impossible to talk to about my alcohol problem before I started working on it myself. I felt like because I was working and because I was fit, even though I was drinking in the gym, and if that sounds weird, by the way, remember that Michael Phelps was an alcoholic while he was an Olympic athlete. But because I was working, because I had a job that I hadn't yet completely fucked up, I would later, but I hadn't at that point. Because I hadn't, I felt like I was in control and that I was hiding it well and that I was getting by, but I wasn't. And years later, when I finally started telling people that I thought I had a drinking problem, it emerged that everyone already knew. I was the last person to know about my own alcohol problem. So, as much as you feel like you might be in control of it when you're in that functioning stage, you're not. And I can assure you, I can promise you, that everybody around you knows. You're not hiding it as well as you think you are. If you're drinking regularly, people know. They know. And they probably talk about it when you're not there. And you might think, because of the false confidence that alcohol gives you sometimes, that you're impressing people around you, but you are not. In fact, you probably make people nervous. There is an implication in the phrase functioning alcoholic that you have some kind of special ability. I think because of the parallelism with phrases like high-functioning ADHD or autistic savant and that kind of language. The parallel is that if you are a functioning alcoholic, you are somehow immune to alcohol, or it somehow empowers you. And that's fucking ridiculous. And that attitude pisses me off more than anything else. People who brag about being a functioning alcoholic. You're not a functioning alcoholic, you're an alcoholic. That's the important part of the phrase. Got angry there. Forget any romantic notion that you are in any way exceptional. That you are an exception to the rule of alcoholism. There are no exceptions. And I'll give you some hard truths. Hemingway, who is famous for being quite prolific, even though he was an alcoholic to the point that his liver was visibly sticking out of his body. His later work is not very good. So people who quote Hemingway as somebody who was able to work while also being an alcoholic, it simply isn't true. From 1949 onwards, his work is noticeably lower in quality. The same is true of Hunter S. Thompson, another famous addict, I suppose, or famous for an excessive lifestyle. His later work is also not the same quality. And both of those people's lives ended in suicide. Another example that often gets quoted, Lemmy from Motorhead. Lemmy had to stop touring, and even fans of Lemmy will say that, yeah, while his work was consistent for most of his life, after his middle-aged years, there was no evolution in his music anymore. So even someone like Lemmy is an example of how alcohol can stunt your creative abilities. And the same is true of my own hero, Christopher Hitchens, whose work diminished at the height of his alcoholism, in my opinion, and then recovered slightly in the period just before his own death, where he suddenly became incredibly lucid and powerful again. And I think that's because he was sober in that period. And instead of looking at his work and thinking, look, he did all of this because of alcohol, my feeling is, what could he have done without it? There is only one exception I can think of. Well, two. One is William Faulkner, whose work was always astonishing, even late into his alcoholism. And the other is Picasso. But Picasso wasn't anywhere near the level of malignant alcoholism as like a Hemingway. So that's really one example in all of human history that I can think of who beat the rule of functioning alcoholism. One, maybe two exceptions out of the millions and millions of people who drink every day. And let me ask you this, if you think you are also an exception. Are you Pablo fucking Picasso? I don't think so. No offense, but look at you. Now imagine what all of those people could have done if they hadn't foreshortened their lives with alcohol. Imagine what Alexander the Great would have gone on to accomplish if he hadn't drunk himself to death at 32 or whatever it was. My point is, and I'm sorry I got heated in the process of making this point, that every exception you can name who you can hold up to be a good example of functioning alcoholism, if you just scratch beneath the surface even slightly, you will see almost without exception that their lives were terrible towards the end. And alcohol did, in fact, have a major impact on their ability to do their work or to enjoy their later years. And to people who brag about being a functioning alcoholic, I would say, is operating at 30% capacity something to brag about? You've got so much to give. Why would you give it all to the bottle? You know? Sobriety gives you such a massive advantage over everybody else around you. In fact, I don't want everybody else to quit drinking because I'm killing it. While everybody else is drinking, I am making massive progress. And when I thought that I was a functioning alcoholic, in sobriety, I can go back and recognize that what I was just an alcoholic. And that now, in sobriety, now I am a functioning alcoholic. A lot of functioning alcoholics, self-labeling functioning alcoholics, do so, give themselves that title, because they don't feel like they fit the stereotype of an alcoholic. They don't feel like they fit the conventional social model of an alcoholic. And because you're able to get the kids up and to school on time, and you can pay your bills and hit your deadlines, and perhaps you have an active social life, and your impression of an alcoholic is a 55-year-old man living on the street and yelling at traffic, you might be tempted to think that you're not like them. But let me assure you, as someone who has been at both ends of that spectrum, both kind of a successful-ish functioning person and also a down-and-out yelling at traffic person, I can assure you that the condition is the same underneath. And yes, you might have slightly different genetics, or you may have had slightly different opportunities, and your life might have gone in a different direction to that person yelling at traffic. But alcoholism is more or less the same for everyone. Whether alcoholism allows you to keep your job or whether it forces you onto the streets, the condition is the same. It's only the circumstances which are different. Now, if you have an alcohol problem and you hand wave it away with the phrase functioning alcoholic, then ask yourself this: by what standard are you functioning? Because I promise you this is a vow to you. Once you get sober and actually start functioning, you will start to understand that in the alcoholism part of your life, you were never really functioning at all. Once you begin to see what you are capable of, and that you are capable of experiencing all of your emotions, including the negative ones, you will learn that you had a huge amount of capacity the whole time. And what alcohol was doing was actually preventing you from functioning. In fact, you were barely scraping through day by day. And for most of that time, you were, in fact, miserable. And I think something that's worse, certainly more harmful, is that labeling yourself a functioning alcoholic doesn't just hurt you, it hurts other people around you. Because once you say it to yourself, you give yourself a license to drink, to put the problem off another day. You'll wait until you are no longer functioning before you address it. But also, I've heard people a lot describe themselves as functioning alcoholics with some pride. And I fear not only does it give them a license to continue drinking, if there is anyone around them who has just begun to struggle with alcohol, I think it gives that person a license to continue drinking too. The title, the phrase, functioning alcoholic, is selfish and deeply harmful. So at the very least, if you're not in a position to address your functioning alcoholism, at least for me, for sober people everywhere, for struggling people everywhere, stop saying it. I'm going to, after this video, I'm going to stop using the term functioning alcoholic, because it is a falsehood. It is a fallacy. It doesn't exist. You are not functioning. And I feel like it gives people an excuse to continue drinking. The way we talk about alcohol, man, it's gross. Do you remember those adverts for cigarettes from the 1950s where it was a print ad and there would be a picture of a doctor and the line of copy would read something like, "Smoke for your throat's sake"? And we look back on that now and scoff and wonder how we could ever believe such a thing to be true. That's like how we talk about alcohol today. It's like one of those old cigarette adverts. And I'm grateful to say that younger people certainly younger than me, are starting to see that for what it is. And I think people who are kids now, when they get to my age, which is around 40, will also look back on the way that we talked about alcohol with disbelief. But we're not there yet. We'll get there, thanks to a much better educated generation of young people coming up now. So there's hope for the future at least. The phrase functioning alcoholic is a lie rolled out, often by people to delay facing the truth about their unhealthy relationship with alcohol. And the truth is this: if you require alcohol to function, then you are not really functioning at all. Okay, I think that's all I've got for today. So please comment, share your thoughts on functioning alcoholism. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you're willing to do so. Thank you for watching, and as always, good luck out there.